Welcome to the 28storms.com tropical weather update for Sunday, July 17th. We now have Tropical Depression number 2 located just to the east of Florida, so let's get right to business. We see that the main thing that has generated low pressure along the Florida east coast is this stalled out frontal boundary draped across much of the western Atlantic, and sure enough we now have Tropical Depression 2 right here. Also, very quickly, notice the Gulf and Caribbean are very quiet today. We do have 2 or 3 tropical waves in the central and eastern Atlantic, but none of those are likely to develop, and we still have the likelihood of tropical storm formation in the coming days from the 1008 millibar surface low just to the west of Honduras. More on that in just a moment. More importantly, at least at the moment, is Tropical Depression number 2. We can see it's becoming much more well-defined this afternoon on both visible and infrared satellite imagery. And you can also make out the location of the trough quite well on the water vapor. It extends all the way from Bermuda all the way to southern Florida and into the central Gulf Coast, where Baldwin County, Alabama has gotten 5 to 10 inches of rainfall in just the last 24 hours. But here we are just to the north of the Bahamas. That's the location of Tropical Depression number 2. We see on the latest precipitable water analysis that TD2 is a fairly small storm in terms of size, but it has slowly gotten its act together, and you can see that the cyclonic rotation has been on a steady rise for the last 24 to 48 hours. We also see that there has been a small spike in the 850 millibar vorticity compared to yesterday afternoon, so that's a healthy sign that this depression is slowly developing. As you can see on the floater visible imagery, you can see that there's a very good reason why this is now being considered a tropical depression. The system has become much more organized. Yesterday afternoon we were beginning to see a blowup of convection, but it was located primarily to the southeast of the surface circulation, and this afternoon it looks like some of the strongest cloud tops and convection is developing directly over that particular center, as you can also see on the latest infrared. The center would be located just about right in here, and we are seeing convective bursts right over the center. The latest microwave satellite pass taken just a couple hours ago also reveals an increase in low-level banding features, with the center located just to the north right here, north of the Bahamas. Yesterday afternoon's southerly drift began to spark concerns over development because, as we can see, upper-level conditions are more favorable as we get closer to the Bahamas, with wind shear values generally less than 5 knots. We can also see that some of the strongest wind shear is located to the northeast of our particular depression, where we have wind shear in excess of 40 to 50 knots up there, but down south we have a favorable pocket of upper-level ridging just to the east of Miami. On water vapor, you will find that there is still a strong presence of mid to upper-level ridging across much of the south-central United States, with much of the weather-related activity occurring all around this particular ridge, keeping much of the areas in the central portion of the country high, dry, and above normal in terms of temperatures. But that ridge is also keeping much of the strongest westerlies a bit more toward the north over the mid-Atlantic, New England, and far northwest Atlantic, where we're still seeing some very strong pockets of wind shear in excess of 40 to 50 knots. Down here we're looking at a little bit more favorable conditions. However, I still do not foresee this particular storm becoming all that intense. As you can see, it's still somewhat connected to that stalled out frontal boundary, and that's helping to draw some of the low-level energy and moisture away from the storm's center. And I really don't think that this will become much more than a moderate tropical storm. The National Hurricane Center is closely following the model consensus and showing a maximum intensity of about 60 miles per hour. And I think that's really about as strong as it's going to possibly get. It might actually stay a little bit under that. Despite my general thinking, much of the intensity models do ramp this up to a moderate to strong tropical storm. As you can see, the ships and several of the other intensity models take this between 50 and 60 knots over the next 48 to 72 hours. The official forecast track from the National Hurricane Center slowly begins to turn this more toward the northeast. By 2 p.m. Wednesday, it's located to the southeast of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. By 2 p.m. Thursday, it is expected to be northwest of Bermuda, but always be on guard because you are in the margin of error, so to speak. But it should pass to the north, bringing you nothing more than isolated shower and thunderstorm activity. And by 2 p.m. Friday, it's well out to sea, moving well away from the east coast of the United States. As of right now, the main impact along the U.S. should be the risk of rip currents from Florida to North Carolina. If you are watching yesterday, you would remember that the tropical model suite all had this storm passing over the central Florida peninsula and eventually into the Gulf of Mexico. Yesterday, I really thought that that would be an incorrect solution. The tropical model suite usually has a very tough time handling mid to upper level features as they come in through the central and eastern United States, and sure enough, the models have done nearly just about a 180, and now all of the models, with the exception of the shallow BAM model, is taking this out to sea in agreement with the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center. As of right now, the storm is barely moving as it's caught between that powerful mid-level ridge located over the central United States and the stronger troughiness over New England, but this trough is expected to deepen a little bit more here over the western Atlantic, and that's going to create a weakness for this tropical depression to begin to move into, and it's going to ever so slowly begin to move toward the northeast and then gradually gain more speed as it ejects out to sea. Although none of the global models are correctly initializing the tropical depression, they do correctly show an increase in long-wave troughing about to exit the Mid-Atlantic and New England states over the next 48 to 72 hours. We're currently looking at the 500 millibar relative vorticity forecast from the GFS forecast model, and notice over New England and the Mid-Atlantic we begin to see another pulse of long-wave energy beginning to exit the coast in roughly 45 to 48 hours, and by 60 to 72 hours we see a lot more troughing out here to the south of oceanic Canada. So just to summarize, I do firmly believe that Tropical Depression 2 will become Tropical Storm Brett, although Brett should remain relatively weak in nature, becoming no more than a moderate tropical storm, and we're looking all clear in the rest of the Atlantic Basin. None of the models are showing any development elsewhere for the foreseeable future, but in the Eastern Pacific we will more than likely have yet another tropical storm here in the coming days, and it's all going to originate from this developing area of low pressure here just to the west of Nicaragua, and we can see on the latest visible imagery that we are steadily seeing an increase in cyclonic rotation, and it will continue to organize as it moves off toward the west-northwest. Here are the latest model plots for Invest 94, and you can see it starts at a relatively low latitude near 10 degrees north, but the models are taking this a bit more toward the west-northwest in the medium range, so we still have to be on the lookout here if you live anywhere along the Mexican Riviera. Right now the model consensus is just to the southwest of your location, but still this is well in the margin of error for a medium range forecast. This is the 18Z forecast from the GFS, and as we can see, it quickly develops this area of low pressure into a tropical depression and eventually Tropical Storm Dora, and it might even make a run at becoming a minimal hurricane if the GFS were to verify. And as you can see, by day 4, which is early Thursday afternoon, we could have a tropical cyclone just off the coast of Manzanillo, Mexico. As it stands right now, once again, the consensus is just off the coastline. If we take a quick look at the ECMWF, we can see that there's really nothing out there during day 1, but here in 24 hours we see that it quickly develops a stronger area of low pressure. By days 2 and 3, it's now organized into Tropical Storm Dora, and the one good thing about the European is that it is a bit more to the south compared to the GFS, and by day 4 it's now out of the picture, but clearly a bit more toward the south and a bit farther away from the Mexican Riviera. And finally, we're still following Typhoon Maiyan out there in the western Pacific. It's still expected to impact southern Japan with upper end Category 2 or perhaps even Category 3 force winds, especially along the southern half of the nation. The most recent forecast track from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center calls for Maiyan to strike southern Japan with maximum sustained winds of nearly 100 knots or 105 knots, and look how slow this storm is expected to move once it begins to near the Japanese coast. So it's going to be a long 24 to 48 hour span coming up here, and let's just hope that Japan is ready for the worst. So that is your tropical weather update for this Sunday evening. Stick with 28storms.com for more continuous updates for tropical weather across the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific.